The conventional perception is that growth is the most significant and maybe the easiest driver of poverty elimination. But economic growth is not sufficient to reduce deficiency in the developing world. It is now obvious that more than a decade, a speedy growth in underdeveloped countries has been of little or negative advantage to their population. The alarming allegation of this is that millions of significantly deprived classes of the society have been damaged rather than facilitated by economic development. However, intense debate continues to the cruelty over the extent to which this economic growth has benefited poor people in the developing world. There are lots of evidences that correct patterns of economic growth and globalization are widening income disparities and thus acting as a brake on poverty reduction. However, on the other hand, some experts argue that economic growth has a tendency to increase income inequality, and higher levels of inequality ensure that economic growth benefits the wealthy people rather than the poor people. This argument is correct, then the best way to reduce poverty would be to the first tackle considerable income and asset inequalities in the low level income countries of the world. Human development indicators such as education and health are positively related to the growth, but often less strongly than income inequality. However, growth is clearly not an end in itself, rather resources to the other ends. Growth definitely provides essential resources for the accomplishment of ends. Therefore, the benefits of growth should be able to sufficiently distributed by the total general public of motherland. In this correlation, the argument about the poverty, economic inequality and growth is in fact significant. In 1776, Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations argued that the poverty is the inability to afford not only the commodities which are indispensably necessary for the support of life, but whatever the custom of the country provides, it rude for the honorable people, even of the lowest order, to be without. In 1958, John Kenneth Galbraith argued that people are poverty hurt when their income, even if adequate for survival, falls behind the noticeably that of their commodity. In 1964, a Joint Committee Economic President's report in the United States Republications endorsed that the concept of relative poverty. No objective definition of the poverty exists. The definition varies from place to place and time to time. Economic inequality, also described as the gap between the rich people and the poor people. Income inequality, wealth difference, wealth and income differences, or wealth gap, that is the difference between the individuals or populations in the distribution of their assets, wealth or income. The term typically refers to the inequality among the individuals and groups within a society, but can also refer to inequality among the countries. The issue of economic inequality involves equity, equality of outcome, equality of opportunity and life expectancy. Thus, the income inequality is often presented the unequal distribution of household or individual income across the various participants in an economy. The term growth refers to a positive change in the size over a period of time. Growth can occur as a stage of malnutrition or a process towards fullness or fulfillment of all kinds of needs of human beings. Therefore, the quantity of physical growth in terms of amount of money. Types of poverty are as follows. Number 1, absolute poverty. It is a condition characterized by rigorous deprivation of basic needs, including food, safe drinking water, sanitation facilities, health, shelter, education and information. It depends not only on income but also on access to social services. The term absolute poverty is sometimes synonymously referred to as extreme poverty. Second one is relative poverty. It views poverty as a socially defined and dependent on social context. Hence, relative poverty is a measure of income inequality. Usually, relative poverty is measured as a percentage of population with income less than some fixed proportion of average income. Relative poverty is the most useful measure as ascertaining poverty rates in wealthy developed nations. As a result, poverty may also be understood as an aspect of unequal social status and inequitable social relationships, etc. Deficiency may also be acknowledged as experienced as a deficiency, social exclusion, and diminished capacity to participate or to develop meaningful connections with other people of the society. Poverty in India is widespread and general. In 2010, the World Bank reported that 32.7% of the people in India fall below the international poverty line of $1.25 per day. At the same time, 68.7 live less than $2 per day. According to 2010 data from the United Nations Development Program, an estimated 29.8% of the Indians live below the national poverty line. A 2010 report by the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative states that 8 Indian states have 421 million poor people, more poor than the sub-African countries. Consequences of poverty. Poverty often considerably influences achievement of the children in education. Home activities, preferences, mannerisms of a child must be into live with the world in the school and most importantly in the classroom. Better education for both men and women are very important. Therefore, it is safe to announce that children who live at below the poverty level will have far less success educationally than children who live above the poverty line. Poor children have a general deal less health care, and this ultimately results in many deficiencies from the academic year. Additionally, poor children are much more likely to suffer from hunger. Slum dwellers, who make up a third of the world's urban population, live in the poverty no better, if not worse, than the rural people, who are the traditional focus for the poverty in developing world. There are over 100 million street children worldwide. Poverty increases the risk of homelessness. Homeless children in the US grew from 1.2 million in 2007 to 1.6 million in 2010. Most of the children living in institutions around the world have surviving parent or close relative, and they must commonly enter orphanages because of poverty. According to experts, many women become victims of trafficking, the most common approach of which is prostitution as a means of survival and economic harassment. Deterioration of living conditions can often compel the children to throw away from the school, to serve up for the family income or contribute for the family, putting them at risk of being exploited. Funds provided by the government to the individuals are often washed down to abroad depositories instead of spending on the deprived classes of the society. Government revenue can be diverted away from the basic services to the people or depressed classes of the humanity. There are several steps taken by the government to increase the supply of fundamental requirements of like food and other goods, agricultural technologies such as nitrogen fertilizers, pesticides, new seed varieties and new irrigation methods have dramatically reduce the food shortages in modern times by boosting the yields of previous constraints. The investigators concluded that further investments in Ethiopia were justified as a means of poverty mitigation. Mass production of goods in places such as rapidly industrializing countries like China has made what were once considered luxurious, such as vehicles and computers, economic goods, and thus accessible to many who were otherwise too poor to afford them. Even with the new products such as better seeds or greater volume of them, such as industrial production, the poor still require access to these products. Improving road and highway and transportation infrastructure helps to solve this major traffic jam. Another step can be taken to overcome poverty is controlling overpopulation. Some experts argue that overpopulation and lack of entrance to birth control leads to increase in our population. It is also said that poverty leads to plenty, which results in effective utilization of available scarce resources, and to help to succeed food production and other inventions. However, the family planning decreases population growth. Social factors such as caste, creed, race, articles of faith, sex, age, place discrimination, stereotyping, etc. can negatively affect the productivity and induce poverty. Max Weber and the modernization theory suggest that cultural values could affect economic success. However, researchers have gathered evidence that the values and the ethics are not extremely deep-rooted, and principles and moral values are changing economic opportunities. Factors affecting economic inequality. There are many reasons for economic inequality within the societies. Recent growth in overall income inequality, at least within the developing countries, has been driven mostly by increasing inequality in wages and salaries. Universal factors thought to impact economic inequality include labor market outcomes. Wages can be considered as function of market price as skill and proficiency. The supply and the demand interactions result in a standardization of wage levels within the society that significantly influence on economic inequality. There is a gender income gap which favors males in the market. Another cause for economic inequality is the velocity at which the income tax concerned with the progressiveness of the tax system. Those who are unable to afford an education or decide not to practice optional education generally receive much lower wages. Trade liberalization may shift economic inequality from a global to a domestic scale. When rich countries trade with poor countries, the low-skilled workers in the rich countries may notice reduced wages as a result of competition, while low-skilled workers in the poor countries may notice increased wages. Among the effects of inequality, social problems and other lower rates of social goods. A lower level of economic inequality in society is ignored. Lower level of economic growth, human capital rates of health, etc. also neglected for the end consumption. Inequality increases as a negative effect on subsequent long-run economic growth. Unemployment can harm growth not only because it is a waste of resources, but it generates redistributive apprehension and subsequent tempest. Unemployment drives people to poverty, liquidity limiting labor mobility, and break up self-esteem promoting social break, disturbances and inconsistency. Crime rate has also been shown to be correlated with the inequality in civilization. Generally, studies representing into the relationship with the inequality and murder. Homicides are almost identically defined across all the nations and jurisdictions. Tendencies for violence are universal in societies where income differences are larger. Economic inequality is positively and significantly associated towards the rates of murder. Higher income inequality leads to loss of all forms of social, cultural and community participation. Unemployment benefits and incentive to work must be given to those who have low wage level, thereby reducing inequality. Economic inequality. Economic inequality would be a natural consequence of the wide range of individual skill, proficiency, talent and effort in human population. Monetary disparity is a result of natural variation, individual effort and voluntary exchange. Policies to reduce economic inequality are opportunity index, plutocracy, which is a political governed by wealthy people, and income. It is also important that growth is associated with significant job creation to provide opportunities to the people, benefit from higher education levels and move out of agriculture. But the record of employment creation with growth has been very pathetic in many countries. The growth versus equality debate has been influenced by common misperceptions regarding the moral character of economic growth. Moral value of economic growth. In particular, the moral value of economic growth has been de-emphasized or disregarded for the variety of reasons. First, economic growth is typically disregarded by aggregate measures such as gross domestic product or gross national product, which are impersonal and meaningless to any citizen except a statistic. Second, economic growth is often identified as relating to commercial activity generally, which is rarely protected on moral grounds. Third, economic growth appears to involve the promotion of materialistic as opposed to spiritual or philosophical values. First one is, it is apparent that the most important policies to enhance economic growth are those that create the most vibrant and energetic market. This economic growth will be enhanced by the elimination of tariffs, by the adoption of speedy or stable monetary values, and by the creation of legal and institutional infrastructure, contract law, antitrust law, appropriate control on externalities to channel market exchanges so that there are consistently value changing. Again, the ambition of each policy is to improve the opportunities for all citizens of a society and most excellent use of available resources and their talents and abilities. Economic growth is maximized where each citizen is given the maximum opportunity to decide on his or her economic contribution to the nation. A second and distinguishable set of policies often invoked to promote economic growth consists of limitations on government expenditures. Here it is frequently recommended that governments privatize state-owned or managed enterprises, eliminate or reduce subsidies to government workers or other interest groups, and generally reduce taxes and balance the budget. The third fundamental set of policies is somewhat more controversial than the set of marketing facilities. Policies above because it derives from a more problematic evaluation of a government's role in value creation. The government as a reduced allocation mechanism can of course correlate, redistribute resources from one set of citizens to another. We must be careful here in the definition of what is being redistributed. Often welfare facility discussions refer to the rearrangement of income and the distribution of wealth. Income, however, refers to the ability to gain resources by providing services of value to others. Income or income providing capacity implies the possession of skills and thus the regenerative ability to gain resources over time. Income therefore cannot be redistributed. That is, no matter how powerful a government It can take the income producing capacity proposed by one citizen and redistribute that capacity to another. A government may engage in creation of income producing capabilities through education or for older workers through retraining programs. But this is not a redistribution. If it is effective, it is value creation. Redistributive government poverty programs are more accurately regarded as involving a redistribution of wealth, inequality and economic growth. In the 1960s, economist Arthur Melvin Occam argued that there was a transaction between economic growth and the inequality or equality. Pursuing equality could reduce efficiently by reducing incentives to work, save and invest, and throughout the leaky bucket of wasteful government efforts to restructure. Some resources will simply disappear in transfer, so the poor will not receive money that is taken from the rich. Along the same lines, earlier writers had argued that wealthier individuals save proportionately more of their incomes, so that more inequality would lead to higher overall savings and thus capital accumulation and expansion. Income inequality has more favorable impact than trade openness, sound political institutions and foreign investment. High levels of inequality might damage long-term growth by intensifying the potential for financial crisis, discouraging investment because of political instability. Inequality might spoil the government's choices such as rising taxes or cutting public expenditure, etc., by discouraging investment in education and health for the poor. Broadly, accessible education is both deficient to achieve when income distribution is uneven and tends to reduce income gap between the skilled and unskilled labor. A shortage of affordable accommodation is caused by income inequality or discrimination. The primary reason for the extreme inequality in the modern society is the private ownership, private possession of the means of production by a class of owners, which results in a society where this class of owners receive unearned income through ownership of capital, equipment, financial assets or corporate stock, while the majority of the population receives income in the form of wage or salary. In order to set the right this situation, socialists argue that the means of production should be publicly owned so that income differentials would be introspective of individual contribution to the communal manufactured goods. During the last 4 decades of planning, the Indian economy has witnessed a number of changes. It may appear contradictory, but it is true that in spite of planned efforts to eradicate the problems of poverty has been increasing in India. The major objective of planning should be elimination of poverty instead of giving emphasis on increase in national income. In order to meet the problem of poverty, various measures are to be taken. They can be discussed in the following ways. Poverty and unemployment are interrelated. In order to eliminate agricultural unemployment, it is necessary to improve agriculture in the country. Good seeds, good tools, good manure must be arranged for increased production. The major cause of agricultural unemployment in India is the dependence of cultivation upon the rains. Thus, there should be a proper and good arrangement of irrigation through minor and major projects. Animal husbandry and cattle breeding have great potential not only in unemployment but also in overcoming malnutrition. The government should extend a special encouragement for animal husbandry, poultry and fish farming, etc. There is a lack of political and social awakening among the rural people. The program of poverty alleviation is not so simple as to be successfully solved by the government. Thus, there is a great need for political and social awakening. People should be made aware of various programs and benefits of these programs, so that people at the lowest step of rural society may make substantial progress in making their lives more economically productive. World hunger is a terrible symptom of world poverty. If efforts are not only directed to providing food or improving food production or distribution, then the structural root causes that create hunger, poverty and dependency would still remain. Reducing inequality and poverty and promoting equality are the important macroeconomic objectives. The widening income gap between the rich and poor has highlighted the need to understand the causes of relative inequality and poverty and to construct suitable policies to reduce poverty and remove income inequality. Thus, the growth by itself is not necessarily sufficient. It needs to be sustainable, continuous and inclusive growth